Hey, Scott here from whattype.com, and I want to welcome you to whattype.com podcast episode number 1. In this video, I'm going to be talking with my friends Micah Electric and Jake Payton about personal transformation and the development of social skills. Now, the idea for this podcast is to talk with interesting people about relatable topics, about things that will be interesting in their own right, and to sort of sprinkle in Myers-Briggs insights. So this should appeal to a wide audience, whether you're brand new to Myers-Briggs or you've been deeply entrenched in that world for some time. Now, I come to you as a rookie podcast host, so I want to humbly invite you to provide constructive criticism. Anything you think could be better, I'd love to know what you have to say about it. Now, for those of you who are new to the channel, my type is INFJ, and both of my guests, Micah and Jake, are INTJs. Now, both of our types share certain things in common that can be challenges in the social world. So some of what we're going to talk about is going to be specific to our types challenges and opportunities. But I think most of what we talk about is really universally applicable to anyone who wants to get better results in their social life and in their business networking. And I think all three of us have gone through some pretty dramatic transformation over the course of our lives. And speaking for me personally, when I was a kid, I felt very much like an outcast. Most of the people in my family were very different from me, and I had a lot of social anxiety and even social phobias. Starting especially I remember, sort of burned in my mind my first day in kindergarten and just being like a deer in headlights, having no idea how to operate in this realm with all these different people and how to operate socially. And for years, I really struggled deeply with social anxiety. But as an adult, I learned certain things and developed certain skills that have made me much more comfortable and have allowed me to do things that I would have thought were impossible as a kid. Addressing crowds of people, doing interviews on television, organizing social events, even getting up on stage at the Comedy Store, things that truly I would have never imagined I'd be able to do when I was younger. Now, Myers-Briggs has been instrumental in my personal development, in me going from a frustrated, misunderstood kid to feeling comfortable in my own skin and feeling permission to be myself, while also understanding and validating other people. If you're experiencing disconnects with other people in your life, with people in your family, with people socially, or with people in business, then Myers-Briggs can almost certainly help you. Now, the first step to unlocking the power of Myers-Briggs is to know and understand your own type. If you're not sure what your type is, you'll never be able to unlock the world of insights and to really create these connections in your life and to feel the full permission to really be yourself and to put yourself in advantageous situations. If you're interested in learning what your type is and really understanding it deeply, then I encourage you to go to whattype.com/mytype to learn how I can help you find your correct type and to really understand it at a deep level. If you already know your type, but are looking to get better results in your interpersonal relationships and in business, you can go to whattype.com/services to learn about consultations. And you can also go to whattype.com/course to learn about my upcoming course on Myers-Briggs theory and on type reading, on being able to tell what types other people are. So now I'd like to talk about my guests on podcast episode number 1. Micah was my neighbor for a few years in Hollywood, and we really got to know each other doing community events. And then while we were on lockdown in March 2020, Micah was my sort of co-conspirator and the sound engineer for something we did called the Hollywood Quarantine Choir, where we basically rigged up 7 PA speakers and we did sing-alongs every week, every Friday night at 7 p.m. in our neighborhood in Hollywood to sort of, pump things up in the neighborhood, keep people inspired, and really stay connected with each other during the pandemic.
Okay.
And as I really got to know Micah through working on the quarantine choir, I was really impressed at his attention to detail, at his strategic thinking, and at how much he cared about what we were doing. So I remember at one point him saying to me as we were working out, some things with the quarantine choir, "Man, your brain really works very differently from mine." And I said, "Great. I have the feeling that we're going to learn a lot from each other." And I like to think that we have. Now, Micah introduced me to Jake, and Jake is a dating and relationship expert. Jake is, his depth of understanding of interpersonal relationships is just astounding to me. We got to spend some time together in Joshua Tree, and I really got to know Jake through spending some time with him there, and I think he has a ton to offer. So without further ado, here is whattype.com podcast episode number 1. I hope you enjoy it. What's up, everybody? I am here with my good friends Micah Electric and Jake Payton, and we are all INJs. So Micah is an INTJ, Jake is an INTJ, and I am an INFJ. What's up, Micah? What's up, Jake? How are you guys doing?
Hola.
Hey, doing well.
Hell nah.
How are you?
Doing well. So Micah and I were on a hike last week, and we were talking about something to do with social skills, like, awkwardness when we were, young kids and, and all that fun stuff. And I thought this would be an interesting conversation because our types have a lot of this in common. We tend to be sort of late bloomers socially. So Micah is a musician, producer, and entrepreneur. While we were on this hike, we thought of our good friend Jake, who's a dating and relationship expert who specializes in at-risk relationships, and someone who is very skilled in the social arts. I think we were talking about something, and I think it just occurred to one of us, like, oh, it would be great to get Jake's take on this. And then why don't we record this? Because I think this could be an interesting discussion, both about personality type and about social skills. I think a lot of people get benefit from Myers-Briggs in the social realm in terms of, understanding, there may be disconnects that we have with certain people. And as we come to understand certain insights from Myers-Briggs, it can be really, helpful. So I think, some people going to Myers-Briggs are seeking better results socially. So I thought it would be a good discussion worth having here on the YouTubes.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So to start by talking very briefly about some Myers-Briggs theory. So I plan on releasing a course. If you go to whattype.com/course, you can get up to speed on theory and learning how to tell what types people are. And we'll get deeper into that, of course, in the course. But to sort of explain in basic terms, INTJ and INFJ, those two, Myers-Briggs types. So for anyone new, there are 16 different Myers-Briggs types. And INTJs and INFJs are, most people think, the most rare of the 16 types. And challenges that these two types have, challenges and opportunities, because all Myers-Briggs types have a certain set of challenges and opportunities. And if you see it from a certain perspective, none is better than any other. It's just that we're wired to do things really well, and then by virtue of that, we have our challenges. So our types, INTJ and INFJ, we tend to be problem solvers. when we're at our best, what our brain does is it takes, things that we've internalized, pieces of data, and it sort of shifts it around, shifts these pieces around unconsciously in our minds in order to produce insights, to see patterns, and often, to predict what's going to happen in the future and things like that. Now, when we use that process, our brain sort of snaps back to that process all the time. And it's like our brain's operating system. It's like sort of like water to a fish. Now, part of the challenge socially with that inclination is that we are not as naturally in tuned to what's happening in tangible reality, sort of outside of ourselves. We tend to, when we're using this function, which we do habitually, we're detached from the outside world and we're kind of in our heads. So we can be sort of late bloomers socially, but we can also, over time learn social skills and in some cases surpass people who have more of a natural inclination to towards social intelligence in some areas, if we really sort of like make a study out of it, like Jake. Jake has I think really mastered a lot in the social arts, and gets paid good money to do things like relationship coaching, getting people out of the doghouse, things like that, because Jake understands how social interactions fundamentally work. Like, so INTJs have very strategic brains, generally speaking. So I'll give you a quick difference between our types. So, and these create their own sort of set of challenges, and we can get that a little bit. But like, so INFJs, we have that same sort of being in our head inclination. We're also very empathetic. And being that the in our head part is actually where we spend more of our time, the empathetic element to it can actually be a challenge, because despite the fact that sort of empathy and an awareness of emotional undercurrents in things can be beneficial socially, we can have a rough go at it sometimes when, like, because we have like this awareness of this like sort of tension and harmony, and we want things to be harmonious, but it takes time to sort of develop that skill. So as a counterexample, an ENFJ, the sort of extroverted version of my type, they are naturally attuned to the outside world and emotional undercurrents and all that. So they tend to pick up on you. They tend to have or develop social skills and social intelligence quicker. Whereas an INFJ, like for us, we can go through, painfully awkward stages trying to figure out how to turn that empathetic element into a strength and learn skills and sort of learn how to get out of our heads and whatnot. For INTJs don't have that same sort of empathetic component in the same way. I mean, any functioning, human being who's not a sociopath has empathy, but, INTJs tend to have a little bit more of a buffer there. So for an INFJ, we can't get away from it. It's like a friend of mine put it this way. It's like having a second nervous system on the outside of your skin. Like, you can't, if someone is like hurt, in the room, like, we can't not be affected by that. And we have a lower tolerance by nature for tension. We can develop that. We can learn to hold tension and to have difficult conversations and things as we develop, but it's something that can be a challenge for us developmentally. But like INTJs, being naturally very good strategists, this is something that can be applied to the world of social skills. So it just, usually takes a little bit of time and self-development to sort of reach the potential there. both of our types are good at sort of getting into the perspectives of other people. INFJs will tend to, get into more of like, what is this person feeling? Whereas like INTJs can be very good at getting into people's thought processes. So INTJs can be actually very good at understanding and analyzing things that matter socially. But we usually don't, come out of the gate that way. So anyhow, that's how I would preface this with, what the sort of the challenges and opportunities are for our types.
I mean, you have said to me, sorry to interject 1 second here, but you have said to me on a couple of occasions that INTJs are all about efficiency.
Yes.
And getting to the point quicker. And yet you're also saying that we're in our heads and that we need a little bit of analytical time and then we can dive in. I have seen both of that, and I agree with you on all of that. I think one of the things that from what you're saying right now about the INTJ difference is, and I'm just bottom lining it because I like to be efficient, is the fact that you're going to analyze it longer, and you might, from what I've seen at least, have a harder time applying the conclusions that you come up with to the real world, because you're also thinking of the feeling part of it with a lot more depth than Jake or I will. We're more about the bottom line. It's like, if you know A, B, and C, then you know D is next. You'll be like, well, if you know A, B, and C, then D might be next, but somebody might want to skip D and go right to E. And I go, I don't really give a shit. D is next. That's what it is.
Yeah, a great example of an INTJ who is on the extreme. I just finished the Walter Isaacson biography on Elon Musk. And, Elon Musk has Asperger's. So, INTJs by nature are, they're like, shit gets done first and people's feelings come next.
That's right.
Elon Musk is that to the extreme. Yes, I think that's.
I mean, that's the difference I've seen in you and I when we're navigating the social dynamics of any room, is that you're very aware, much more aware of people's possible issues with certain things that are going on, or their feelings or whatever. And I'm more about, let's get to the bottom of the point of this conversation. And I know for sure Jake is that way even more than I am. So it's very interesting how we navigate those different dynamics. But yeah, I mean, your feelings are your responsibility. That's a great video by Kyle Cease. I'll promote him. I love him.
Yeah.
And when that video came out, that explained so much of how I feel to other people who disagreed with that concept inherently. And I was just like, see, I'm not the only one who's saying this. Like, actual psychologists and life coaches and those kind of people have been saying this for years, and people want to shrug off responsibility for the way that they feel, as if the person who triggered it is the actual person causing the issue. There's also one called nonviolent communication. One of the main points in that entire video series is that there's a trigger for your feelings, and then there's your actual feelings. And the feelings that you feel and continue to feel are because of the way that you think of yourself and the world and your place in it, not because of the trigger.
Stop. Right. And if you don't separate those two, then you are just an automaton who is just, moving in lockstep with the stimulus in your environment without being able to separate and then recognize, this is how I feel from, that. And from there, if we're aware of this, we have choices about how we respond to it. Because if we're speaking from the language of, you made me do this thing,
right,
that's all, I mean, this is all basic, like hypnosis, sort of thinking, that's how, that's the power of suggestion. If you speak like that, you think like that, and therefore you are at cause and not at effect.
Well, you're a victim. It's a victim perspective, and a lot of people go right to it because it's an easy out.
Yeah. So Jake, do you have any?
Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
Jump in, of course.
Yes.
Yeah. So for me, before I was aware that I had a choice what my emotions were causing, I was just, there'd be an emotion and there'd be an effect, and I felt like I had no choice what I was doing. And through some mentorship, I had a mentor specifically tell me, he was like, whoa, you stop, you get to stop, and you get to choose whether or not you want to feel that emotion when it comes into you. Right. And you don't get to choose what you feel in the first place, but once you have that emotion, you get to stop and you get to decide, okay, is this rational or is this whatever? And in that way, I was able to kind of install almost software into myself to start having those emotional tools that I needed. And that also applies to empathy. So for me, I started finding answers through being empathetic. So empathy for me was almost a tool towards a solution that later ended in me actually having empathy more than I ever would have had I not found a solution
That's
there.
how they, yeah, that's how they
Sure.
get you.
Yeah, I agree.
Sell you on that empathy, and next thing you know, it's, yeah, you end up at empathy, and it's actually
I mean,
a
it's
good
an
thing.
interesting transition from baby to child to teen to adult, because like so much of those instances are you having a feeling and then having the natural reaction to it. And the natural reaction is whatever it is in the beginning when you're a baby, perhaps, but that I think it gets shaped extremely quickly by the type of reaction that your parents have to it too. One kid falls off of a swing and a parent is hysterical, crying and going nuts and running to the hospital immediately. And another one goes, oh, get up, you're fine, don't worry about it. And the kid's smiling and back on the swing in like 30 seconds because of the different kind of reaction that the parents had. I was actually on a hike with my sister recently, and we actually saw this in real life, where a kid fell off a rock that he was climbing, and the mom had hysterical reaction at first, but saw my sister's reaction being super calm and smiling at the boy and cheering him on. And he got up and he cried for literally 10 seconds and stopped crying because she was not reacting in a negative way. So I think when that happens again and again to kids, they get trained to having a certain reaction to their feelings. And when they're scared or whatever, that kind of thing happens, their reaction gets reinforced by the parent who's also scared. But if you have a parent who's calm and who's smiling at you, saying you're okay, and whatever kind of like encouraging things, I think you can get past it very quickly. Obviously, we don't have much control of that when we're kids, but as Jake said, there's a certain point where you realize you do have some control over it. You're going to have that instant triggered feeling, sure, but how you react to it is definitely a choice at a certain point in your maturity and your growth.
I
Yeah,
have a
Go ahead, sorry.
2-year-old daughter, and I can see her look to me
Yeah.
to figure out how she's supposed to feel when something like that happens quite often. So that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this comes into play in social situations, totally. I want to tell a quick story, and then on the topic, and then we can get into some more of the social stuff. So this was a profound insight for me on recognizing that I had a choice in situations where I didn't consciously realize that I did. So I went to a seminar by a guy named Eben Pagan, and I was so juiced up after the seminar. I was like, I got to do something in tangible reality to prove that something has changed in my life. I need a symbolic sort of victory. So I was like, what am I going to do? And I thought of Six Flags. They have a ride there. So I was afraid of heights. They have a ride there called the Superman ride, which goes way straight up and then way back down. And I was like, oh, yeah, I would never go on that. Therefore, I must. So I recruited a friend of mine who was at the seminar. I was all juiced up. I'm like, I'm going to do this thing and I'll conquer the Superman ride, and then I'm going to feel invincible. And he was all in, and he offered to drive. So we drive up there. We get to the parking lot. The Superman ride is right there at the parking lot. And I'll never forget, I looked up at that thing. And I was like, I knew in the deepest part of my soul, I was like, I am never getting on that. I had this horrible feeling. I was like, no, it's not going to happen.
This is so
And I
interesting.
couldn't.
I would have a totally different reaction, but go on. This is so.
But I couldn't tell him in that moment, like right when we drove there after I, pumped the whole thing up, like, oh yeah, sorry, bro, that's not happening. We just came for nothing, whatever. So I was like, I'm trying to figure out what to, like, trying to buy myself time. I'm like, all right, I need to go on like the sissiest rides first and work my way up. So we literally went on like the kiddie roller coasters, and I'm like white knuckling it on this thing. I'm like, when is the last time they inspected this thing? And I'm buying time, and I'm like, let's go do some water rides for fun, whatever. And I'm like trying to figure out what I'm gonna say. And then he's like, come on, let's get back on it. Let's do some roller coasters. Let's work your way up, whatever. I'm like, all right. So I start going to these roller coasters, and I had a moment where I realized, my natural reaction on all these roller coasters was to clamp down and just be in this sort of state of fear. And it just occurred to me, like, okay, I've committed to this thing. I'm strapped on this thing. I'm not getting off of it. What if I decided to approach this differently? What if I adopted it? What if I was just like, well, I'm on this ride and whatever that happens, happens, and I'm just going to let go and ride the ride. So I started to have these moments where I was like, ooh, okay, it's, and then I go back into it for a minute and then, so on and so forth. And then eventually it got fun. And then we went to the new X2 roller coaster, which goes backwards 1,000,000 miles up in the air. And then, you come flying down, it shoots fire at you and plays Metallica and all this stuff, whatever. And got off that ride and I was like, hell yeah. I was like, let's go on the Superman ride right now. We went to, get directions to it. And then the woman was like, oh, we're sorry, the park is closed. And I was like, oh. So anyhow, I ended up going back there on my birthday a while later and actually went on it. And it was dope. I absolutely loved it. And had there not been a really long line there, I would have gone on that ride all day. But I tell you what, the big lesson was that there was every part of my instincts, my intuition, my everything told me it was impossible, that there was no way that I was going to get on that ride. And then I did, and it was dope. And that goes to, you think of all the things you might be able to extrapolate that to, the things that we don't think are, necessarily possible, when we get out there, get a little bit of exposure therapy. This kind of plays into the social thing too, because that was certainly a big part of my, developing some social skills was exposure therapy and and getting out there and over time your internal feelings about these things change as you actually do things.
It's so interesting to me listening to this story because it's so completely unrelatable to the way that I would think in that situation. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm not judging it. I'm just trying to relate to it.
Right. This is the thing, by the way, about I've had a similar conversation with my dad, and it's very interesting. This is an interesting insight from Myers-Briggs. Because of the way that our brains are wired differently, we don't recognize, unless we really internalize these sort of models, how people's wiring is different. And this is why oftentimes other people's behavior will seem stupid to us or irrational or however we label it, because we don't recognize that they're using a different process that is, is valid in a different way, because it's just our brains are using that wiring. We unconsciously sort of project our processes onto other people. Anyhow, sorry.
But I mean, what's interesting to me is that whenever I approach something that seems a little scary or foreboding, my brain, maybe it's just my soothing mechanism, I don't know, or rationalization or whatever. I think it's with everything though. My brain goes to what's the probability? And the probability of crashing is like, it's infinitesimally small. I'm watching it work like 100 times before I even go on it. It works every single day that way, 100 times a day. So the probability is almost infinitesimally small that anything bad is going to happen. So of course I'm going to go on it. Who cares? The only thing that I would be more concerned about is what's the probability of me throwing up, because that probability is a lot higher. So I know what I need to worry about, but that's not the probability of crashing. But as you were talking, and I was having such a hard time relating to it with this kind of example, I was going back to our hike and what instigated this conversation to begin with, which was a conversation about how I've become really confident and I can push through the fear in almost every area of my life. And still, on occasion, there is that pullback.
Oh, that's right. Now I remember. Yeah.
Of when I'm approaching a girl that I find is actually really attractive, there's still this tiny bit of pullback that reminds me of the pullback I was feeling the first time I jumped out of a plane. And it's just like, no, you don't want to do that. Pull back. Right. And when I think about it, and I think of my answer that I'm giving you right now about the probability of surviving that roller coaster being so high, right? And the probability of surviving that interaction with the girl being so high, and the fact that it's probably not going to go nearly as bad as my worst case scenario in my mind. And yet still, every once in a while, not often, but once in a while, there is that pullback in the social realm that, for me at least, doesn't exist pretty much in any other area of my life.
Yeah, if only we knew someone who understood a thing or two about that. I don't know.
Ding!
Get a different guy.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know, Jake, do you want to comment on that at all?
I mean, I had a lot of that pullback. Like, so back to the roller coaster, I'm not like either one of you guys. I'm like, jump. I'm like, yeah, I'll do it.
He
And I'm
jumps
like,
off roller
and then if
coasters.
it sucks, I'm like,
You're
well,
not
this is gonna
supposed
take
to
some
jump.
getting used to, you know? This is gonna take some getting used to. So like, you know, I wouldn't take that jump that Mike is speaking about, talking with girls. And then I wanted it so badly just to change my life. I just made a decision. This just stops now. All this shit I'm dealing with in my life stops now. And then when I first did that, the walk up, I like had fists clench at my sides, like shaking, physically shaking. And I went and did it anyway. So I'm the type to just do it and then deal with the terribleness later, you know.
Yeah, that
But I think
approach
that
has
comes
actually
from a
been
deep
very
seated.
helpful to me, which I'll comment on after you're done.
I think that comes from a deep seated. I've always been, what do you call it? I've always been brain capable, you know, and I've always known that I was really brain capable. So I've always had a lot of trust in myself and my, you know, I can think my way through it.
Mm-hmm.
I've always had that deep seated, you know, I was never socially verified for that, but I was always, you know, pretty confident in myself intellectually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
You got visitors, Mike?
for me,
Hi.
All good, all good.
so for me, a big part of my social development was exposure therapy, and it was recognizing, I mean, it was not long ago, we can talk a bit about our backgrounds. But I really had no social skills, to speak of. I mean, I remember like the first day of kindergarten, like being absolutely terrified. I was like, "Is all these people?" I had no idea like what's in like literally like formations of people like in groups were like gave me like a feeling of like terror, like like I had like real like social phobias, and a lot of there are a lot of different elements that sort of went into me sort of breaking out of that, but a big part of it was recognizing that like you said, you just do it, and if you don't attach a profound identity meaning to failure if it doesn't go well, and you reframe it into a success, like you just you can start any interaction from the frame of, you know what, I'm terrified of this, but I'm going to be proud of myself for having done it no matter what the results are. There's a performance coach who said that about going into a performance. You say that to yourself before you do it, and you're putting yourself in the right frame of mind so that you're just going to frame everything positively, and can likely also just help the interaction sort of go better, starting from there. But I learned that through cognitive behavioral therapy, and different you know Myers-Briggs, like when I because once I learned I could tell what types people were, I sort of ended up like through some serendipitous interactions realizing like, whoa, I could do this as a pretty neat parlor trick, and people seem to like it, and I was very, because Myers-Briggs helped me to relate to people and relate to my family. It was a big source of pain for me. I became very motivated to want to develop this skill. And so I would do it. I really developed it, the multi-pronged approach, but a big part of it was doing it as a parlor trick in bars. And if I would have an intuition about a person's type, I just might be sitting there in the bar, I hear someone say something, I'm like, oh, I'm like, that guy's an ESTJ, I know it. I would have to start a conversation with them, and of course, like starting, you can imagine, there's a lot of awkwardness to work to figure out how to make this whole thing smooth, and whatever. But it was that important to me, it was that valuable to me, that I would make that leap. And you know, and I'd started a lot of conversations with. I know this is a weird question, but you know, whatever it took, and eventually I got a lot more smooth with it. But it was the exposure therapy of realizing that if something doesn't, and also sort of detachment from the ego. The book The Untethered Soul was very helpful for me. Plant medicine has been very helpful. There are many different things that can help you sort of detach from you, because our ego wants to protect us from it. You know, it operates under the premise that we're sort of separate from the outside world and we need to be protected. And then, you know, social interactions, you know, you can interpret bad social interactions as though there's something wrong with you. That's what I always used to do. So that's why it was so difficult. But once I broke through that barrier and realized if I fall flat on my face on a social interaction, which I've done many times now, you know, I've got lots of reps there, and you know, I'm still alive, and then you actually develop some of the skills, and it happens less and less, and you learn to you actually learn to develop your process for me anyway, by taking certain risks. Once I realized that if it went badly, it didn't mean I was, you know, this irredeemable idiot, you know. Then it gave me permission to experiment, where like, okay, I would do things, you know, always like for the purpose of seeing what would happen. Because I would honestly start, you know, social interactions saying different things where it's like, I don't know where this is going to go. Or sometimes I do things that are counterintuitive to be like, all right, I'm gonna have to figure out how to navigate my way out after I say this particular thing. And yeah, and then you just sort of get in the reps, and it just becomes much easier once you start to detach from that meaning.
Yeah. Yeah, if you detach from outcome in anything, it becomes a lot easier. I agree. And actually, regarding this subject specifically, not that I can remember, I didn't have this mentality until I met Jake and his buddy who introduced me, Brad P. And they're the ones that introduced me to this world of, it doesn't have to mean so much. It doesn't have to be taken so seriously. It can be played with. You're a smart guy, figure out a way to make it fun, detach from that outcome, try the different social cues, try the different social dynamics, just as an experiment. Even if it's going to yield a total shit outcome, it doesn't matter, because you're right. The only way that you're going to get comfortable with any of that process is by doing it again and again and gleaming some lesson from it each time. It's a very different application of the way that I think to this kind of thing than compared to what your initial story was, which was about overcoming a fear to go on a roller coaster. Like, that's a totally different process for me. And that's what's been a little bit difficult sometimes to kind of transfer over, is that I definitely mastered it in some areas of my life and definitely did not master it in other areas of my life. Even when I thought maybe I had made huge amounts of progress, every once in a while, it'll just sneak up and come and bite me in the butt.
I find it's valuable to know, you know, with the roller coaster lesson, that like, so say this, you know, for example, you know, the nut that you want to crack here, when it comes to approaching women who are particularly attractive, I find it psychologically helpful to know in any situation, just have that as a reference point, that even if it feels impossible, that it's not, you know? Yeah.
And so that the ramifications are not going to be that you die. Like, your ramifications in your mind on that roller coaster.
Except the roller coaster, you might.
Well, that's fine. But like,
that was my thinking when
I get it. Well, you said yourself, I get on the roller coaster and think, when's the last time this was inspected? Never in my life have I thought that, because I think they're running it the way that they have to run it, and that's why they never have accidents. But sure, they do occasionally, and you occasionally get hear of it, whatever. But the bottom line,
my mind will go to like, what is the worst possible death that could happen on this roller coaster?
Right. I mean, in terms of like applying that to what type and how that can be an advantage for you, I think it's really important to note that when you're in a social setting, all of these kinds of all this knowledge about how the different brains work can work in your favor if you have that knowledge, if you have the ability to understand that that everybody in the room is not thinking the way that you are, and that they're thinking in these other ways. That knowledge can be of great advantage, especially you put it as your biggest challenge was your family, and at a certain point you realized that the way that they thought was extremely differently from the way that you think, and that helped you navigate social dynamics within your family after that point with a lot more efficiency and therefore a lot more success. And so I think it's also important to realize that that can also happen for people who are not having a hard time with their family. That can also happen in their personal relationships with their partner. That can also happen in their public relationships at work or at school. So, I mean, all of these different kinds of relationships can be affected greatly by understanding and perhaps empathizing from a different perspective, one that's outside of your head rather than inside.
That sounds to me like we're talking about detachment mechanisms, right? Because when you're super, super attached to an outcome, you're going to have a different result than if if you're super, super attached to an outcome, then of course doing the thing is going to be a lot more difficult, right?
Sure.
So we're talking about installing detachment mechanisms in your brain to help ease the entry into action.
Sure. Agreed, specifically with regard to the social dynamics involved in first approaching a woman.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about if you know the different personality types, then it might help you, empathize or understand what other people are going through when that, when that happens to them, that you start a conversation with them, right? That might be an easier way to enter if you understand what's going on maybe before you start. But
yeah.
I think we also touched on a little bit of like progress, and I always say progress is a hell of a drug.
I like that.
So if you jump in first, even that's, well, I did it, and that starts the drug, right? The positive feedback cycle.
Yeah,
I like that's the thought of the day. Progress is a hell of a drug. I love that.
Yeah, that goes back to any sort of an object in motion tends to stay in motion. An object sitting still tends to stay sitting still. It takes a lot more just to get that initial push than it does to
first
keep
action
it
on
yeah, momentum.
Get the momentum going. Exactly.
Yeah, it's like when the Patriots beat the Falcons down 28-3. I'm texting my cousin. I'm like, all we need is one break. I'm like, this is not over.
It's also worth noting. Sorry to jump in on your sports conversation. It's also worth noting that your motivation to achieve something is very closely linked with what you believe your ability is to actually achieve it. If there's $100 bill across the street and you're like, I see that, I can probably beat anybody there, nobody's seen it yet, then you probably go do it, right? But if something is a lot harder, you don't believe that you can do it, it's a lot harder to start in the first place, right? You have really low motivation to achieve it because you don't think that, you don't have an expectation of success.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what does that success mean to you,
Well, right. You're attaching to a specific outcome.
We're talking about detaching, right, from that outcome.
Right. And the way that my brain hears that is also, once again, about probability. Like when he was first talking about the roller coaster example, my brain went to the probability immediately. And when you're talking about this dollar example, or whatever it is, $100 bill example, it's also about probability. I'm going to feel a lot more motivated to run across that street of traffic if I have more of a higher probability of grabbing that $100 bill than if I don't.
Let's talk a little bit. So I'd like to talk about some of the things that we learned along the way, like some of the key lessons. I know we've already talked about it, a few things, but like let's maybe talk about sort of like where we came from.
Along the way to what? Lessons
towards social, feelings of social confidence and competence and learning how to operate in that realm. And in your case, at an expert level.
I haven't figured that out.
So, so I'm from a small town in Rhode Island. Like I said, I was very different from other people in my family. Didn't really have any social skills. Even when, I was 24 years old, I moved to LA. I did not know anyone, and I did not have any social skills. So I mean, I was just retelling the story the other day. But yeah, I landed here from like with absolute zero. I ended up getting a job at Guitar Center, and that sort of started, my social circle and everything. But I've been through a lot of different stages of pain from not understanding how things work socially, and then I can get into maybe some of the things that I've figured out along the way. But yeah, as a kid, I felt awkward. I have, and maybe I'll like splice in like a picture of like me as a kid, and like some like yeah, it was just, so many things about school were just like so awkward. Like I've got some of these ridiculous outfits where I'm like, how did my parents let me leave the home dressed like that? I just felt like there, other people were just on like a different level, and I was just struggling to figure it out. Micah, how would you describe like your, childhood and
I have a
social?
question. I have a question about yours. When you say I didn't have any social skills, you've told me that you got in with a crowd that was into like heavier music and that you would go occasionally to heavier shows, like more metal type shows. So
Mhm.
to me, even though you might not have had the popular social skills and hung out with the popular crowd and the popular people, I feel like the misfits find each other. And
Yeah.
it sounded to me from prior stories like you did have some social skills within that misfit community. And perhaps they weren't exactly what you wanted them to be. And I'm not sitting here trying to counter what you're
Mhm.
saying. Your social skills, I'm sure, created this mindset, and perhaps even the interaction with your family created this mindset of the misfit. But the misfit finds its crew too. Everybody finds their
Yeah.
tribe. And it sounds like you did find your tribe to some degree when you were at these kinds of like metal shows and even playing guitar and doing the things that you did that allowed you a slightly higher social status than maybe what you felt before you did those things.
Yeah, there were some positives. Yeah, and I did have cool, interesting friends in school, but there were always battles and challenges and different, I mean, my teenage years, I remember just being very frustrated about a lot of things socially, women and not knowing, like just not knowing how to behave at parties and this, whatever. Like there were like, yeah, it wasn't all, doom and gloom and nothing but failure.
Yeah.
But I had some very real challenges to me that I couldn't figure out my sort of way out of.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I'm just challenging, I guess, the fact that you said I had zero social skills. It's very black
Well,
and white.
okay, of course, yes, it's true. Okay, so I'm exaggerating,
Yeah,
but
don't you
I
feel
will I will say, like, if you saw me, when I landed in LA, um, there were some moments there where I was just striking out with it, just going around trying to meet people, because back home I had friends, I had social proof, they would introduce me to people, this, that, whatever. I had none of that when I moved to LA. So
right?
then that's when I really recognized, like, okay, like I don't know what I'm doing at all. Yeah.
Interesting. I think it's such a mindset thing too, in the way that you were brought up. Not you specifically, but one is brought up. It's like there's some people I feel who feel like they know nothing until they know everything about a topic. And then there are
Mm.
other people who think that they know everything about a topic the minute that they'll learn one or two things about it. And I think that that specific tipping point is a real difference in the way that people approach different things and even talk about and create the cycles that they end up chasing their tails in regarding all topics, but especially about social topics like what you're talking about. Meaning
Yeah.
you had no social skills. Other people might have looked at your life and thought, "Oh man, I wish I had the social skills of this guy. He plays,
I don't think so.
goes and hangs out at these concerts."
I don't think so, bro. You were well. You met me after I started my sort of personal transformation, where I became comfortable meeting people and enjoy
Fair
it,
enough.
you know.
I'm not saying that I would know all the details. I'm simply saying that like
I mean,
you
I would use, yeah, there were certain things, you
right
know,
and
like liquid courage was a big part of the equation for me. If I had a few drinks in me, I could, you know, muster up the courage or delude myself into thinking
sure.
that, you know, I could pull certain things off or whatever. And it's not like, you know, I was, but my life went through a dramatic change. Around, I joined a cognitive behavioral therapy course in the
That's once
end
you
of
were in
a.
LA, right?
I'm sorry.
Is that once you were in LA?
Yes, and that wasn't that long. That was like 2017, and like I failed the first assignment, which was to start a conversation with a barista. I was literally like I just I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And I went through a pretty dramatic transformation and you know I'll let you guys talk a bit about, you know, sort of where you came from, and then I want to talk about some of the things that I learned that were like big like ahas that
Hmm.
you know might be useful for some other people, hopefully.
On that
So
barista note, we used to teach guys what we called social freedom exercises, right?
that
Like, here's
sounds
these 20 things, here's these
ominous.
20 things, and it's like first you have to walk up to a stranger and say hi, or wave at somebody, or make eye contact with a few people, you know, and then they get more difficult and difficult, and you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, and zero being I was in petrified fear for my life or something, and 10 was I was super comfortable with it, right? And then when you get to a certain number, you write that down, and then next time you do the exercises, you'll get more comfortable, and in that manner you can kind of have a judge of I'm normal or I'm not normal, and here's where I ought to be if I want to have this skill set, kind of a thing. So
Mm.
interesting
Yeah.
enough, what we found most commonly was once people warmed themselves up with easier stuff, they were more willing to do stuff that was outside of their comfort zone, which obvious. Makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I think, yeah, baby steps I found helpful. Yeah.
I think
I
that's
mean,
with
this wasn't
everything.
really baby steps, though. This was like running on a treadmill until your heart explodes, like a stress test.
Well, I mean, okay. So my understanding of what you just said was that doing things that are easier can lead to doing things that are harder. That's what I meant by that, you know. Um,
Yeah, I agree with that. And I agree with the methodology behind that with pretty much everything, but especially in the social realm. And it's basically what you tried to do at the amusement park, right? Let's go on the kiddie rides first. I'll get more comfortable with this bullshit. And then as I'm more comfortable with that, I'll realize that, that is safe as well because it's just taking it a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. It's the exact same thing. If you walk into a bar and all you have to do is say hi to 2 people, you're going to feel a lot better the next time you have to say hi to 5 people, or the next time you have to say more than just hi, but hi, how are you? This is what happened to me today. Like whatever it is, the exercises that increases your social comfortability or uncomfortability in that moment, but then leading to comfortability, it's going to, like anything else, it's going to get better if you do it in steps. If you just dive in the very first time, it can go sometimes go well, but as you pointed out, it can crash and burn. So who knows?
and this plays into something that, so a mentor of mine, Wyatt Woodsmall, who I know from doing the seminars with Evan Pagan, did I mention, or yeah, maybe I didn't mention that, that was before we started recording. I went to these seminars by a man named Evan Pagan and Wyatt Woodsmall, and that led me into Myers-Briggs. But one thing that, Wyatt would say is, he's got a very gruff voice. He'd say, feedback, not Wheaties, is the breakfast of champions. And that's the thing, when you're going out and actually doing something, you're getting feedback. You're not, because otherwise, especially that's a common thing for INJs too, is because we can be good at problem solving, but like it's as a part of becoming an effective person for an INJ, we learn to value feedback as part of that process. And when you have to start with a constructive frame, because if you have a frame where you're going to interpret things that don't go perfectly as negative. It can be the opposite of progress. If you have I call it ABC, always be constructive. So like whatever it is, you frame it constructively and you go out there and you do something and you get feedback. And then even if that feedback is not positive feedback, you interpret that as a success. It's now you have more information with which to operate. And it really helps to have good people around you, good mentors. Like obviously, Jake, you do that for a lot of people. That's another thing too.
Jump in on that framing thing.
Yeah.
It's important to delineate that you're not having a delusional frame. You can't delude.
Yeah.
You can't just delusionally say, this is all positive, right? We're doing great.
She decided not to call the cops. So, right.
It needs to be realistic and not delusional when you're doing that, to some regard. You can't just.
And that's why having a mentor,
positive, right?
Right. That's why having an actual mentor, like someone, that's one thing that, I was like, as a guitar player, I was self-taught. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s, I got a great guitar teacher named Chris Broderick. And, it's
Probably one of the best guitarists in the world. Go on.
Yeah, because Chris is amazing. You don't, if you're not aware of this sort of thing, this dynamic, especially intuitive types, because intuitives, we tend to want to figure things out ourselves. We throw away the instruction manual, but how does this shit really work? What are, we can create blind spots, so certainly with my guitar playing, because I was self-taught, I had a lot of bad habits. And then Chris came in and just tore them to shreds. It's like, and it was super, super valuable. And that's why, because you can't get, that's why when it comes to learning Myers-Briggs profiling, you can't learn how to get good at it from a book. Because what you need to get good at it is actual feedback. And that's what like a coach or a mentor with these sorts of things can give you, that you may never arrive at, no matter how long you try and study it. If you try and get everything from books and everything, someone who knows what they're doing can tell you what you're doing wrong like that. And like Chris with, I started taking lessons from Chris when I started learning how to do home recording in for music, and I would come in with something and I'd play it for him and he would just tear it to shreds, and I loved it because I was like, this is so valuable to me. He's like, you sped up there, he's like, well, you missed a melodic opportunity over there,
But it's framing even there because you love the feedback. I've had guys who've come in with recordings and do the exact same thing, especially when showing ideas, because so many of them will not record to a click track, which, by the way, I can't even comprehend, but let's move on. But like, they'll do the exact same thing. They'll speed it up and slow it down. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? Is this you practicing, or are you trying to actually show me an idea? Because if the tempo isn't solid, it can't be an idea as far as I'm concerned. It just doesn't work for my brain. And I just don't understand why anybody would present anything to anybody that isn't recorded to a click track. Why would you bother? That's so unprofessional. Why would you bother bringing that to a professional or to your lesson, to waste time in your lesson on the most basic thing in the world, which is playing to a click track? Oh, because I can't really play the riff well enough yet. Okay, well then go home and practice the riff until you can play it up to speed. Start it at a lower tempo that you can actually play it 4 times or 8 times in a row. It's actually better, solidly, and then keep increasing it day by day and come back in a week or 2 or however long it takes till you can actually get it up to tempo. Because I agree with Chris 100%. Is like, you have to rip that apart to a point where it actually deflates the student. And your framing was great, right? Because you took it as, oh, I'm so happy he ripped this apart because now it's going to be so much better. But my
it was so valuable. All I wanted to do was like, I wanted like whatever he had planned for me, I was like, can we just skip that? Can I play you this new song I did and you tear it apart for me? Because that's all I wanted to do, because it was so valuable. Another thing that was valuable about that will apply to intuitives a lot in general is that, he taught me counterpoint harmony, and which of course is a very rigid, structured set of well-established rules going back a very long time. And my intuitive brain naturally wants to throw all the rules out the window, whatever. Even like the first assignment, was, right at counterpoint harmony, and right out of the gate. Like, this is how, which is sort of, in retrospect, it's very sort of eye-opening to my process that I was, that sort of, radical and not, missing the key component of learning how to do it right first. And then, I brought it in, and just, the look on his face, I was like, oh, he does not, he's like, I was like, I didn't do it. I took too many liberties here, didn't I? He's like, yeah. He's like, I think you should probably learn how to do it right before you start messing around.
I mean, it's an interesting concept, because that means that there's a specific right and wrong.
Well,
right?
with counterpoint harmony, there is, and I tell you what, because I learned how to do it by the rules, all my harmonies got much better later.
Right.
Whereas when I tried to change it out of the gate, I was missing a lot. And he helped me realize that.
And that's what I was going to say earlier when you were talking about the instructions, and when you were starting to apply it to Chris's lessons with you about right and wrong. Like, sometimes there is a specific structure that dictates right and wrong. And then from there, I mean, for me, at least, I don't throw away the instructions, actually. I read the instructions, but I don't always follow the instructions, because once I know what the instructions say, I might say, okay, well, that's really smart and good. I'm glad I read that. But on this point, number 6, right over here, I think I'm going to do it slightly differently. And I'll make sure that I still feel that way when I get up to that point, but I'll identify it by reading the instructions. So I've always been an instruction follower in the beginning, but then I modify them because I know better, or at least I think.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's very INTJ of you. Yes, INTJs are born to learn how to do things better.
To teach the world.
Pretty much. These other dumbasses wasting their times. So I guess, do you guys want to say anything about, about your backgrounds? I mean, I know, our time is limited, and I want to talk a little bit before we go about some, pivotal moments, key sort of insights. And then I want to talk a little bit more about, what you do, Jake. But yeah, you guys have any comments on sort of like where you came from, and any, challenges along the way in the social realm?
I mean, I think everyone can relate to that idea of feeling a little bit like that awkward feeling, the outcast feeling, like needing to find your tribe, whatever. But what was interesting for me, even pretty young, even though I definitely felt that, I never felt a part of one social group. Like, even when those social groups became much more delineated in high school, like there was the jock, there was the musician, there was the burn, whatever, right? Like, all these. I felt like I felt like I didn't really specifically belong to one, but I also didn't feel like I didn't belong to any. I felt like I belonged to all, actually, or to a certain degree. And it was like really interesting to me to navigate that feeling, counter to the fact that I had so many other friends who really felt like they either belonged to none, or they belonged to only one, maybe just a little bit. And I'm just like, why? Like, I'm in the dorky fucking jazz band, yeah, but I'm also hanging out with these jocks because I also do this and I like those conversations. And then I'm also hanging out with, like, whatever, like all these different social groups, and never again, never did I feel 100% comfortable with any one of them, and like I fully got locked in or belonged to one of them, but I definitely didn't feel like I belonged to none of them. I felt like really comfortable, like at least surfacely, going between each group and feeling like I could align with them to some degree. I can align with this group because of this reason, that group because of that reason, blah, 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 down the line. And I did a lot of things that surprised a lot of people in each group. like they were like the group, the group of like heavy metal burnouts or whatever that were smoking weed all the time. They're like, wait, you went to that social dance from the school? Like, what a dorky move. Like, how could you do that? And I was like, well, I had a great time, actually. There was some really cool people there, and they actually played some cool music. Oh, but it wasn't metal, so it must have sucked. And it's like, okay, well, that's your opinion. I enjoy different kinds of things, so we all have different things. But yeah, I mean, navigating that and starting to figure out how I fit in, or maybe don't fit in, was definitely a bit tricky, because it seemed like To a certain degree, I guess every kid or teenager feels this way. It seemed like I was on the outside all the time, but not 100%. I was always like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, 1 foot in, 1 foot
I
out.
can relate to that.
Yeah.
I think you were better off than I was.
And what's your story, Jake?
I was just kind of sequestered to the people who would accept me being around.
You can't sit here.
Like lowest common denominator, you know, the group that like can't really kick anybody out. Yeah, like that. I would make you know, confident type social moves with no understanding of what they meant to other people, like raising my hand all the time in class to know the answer, that kind of shit, you know? Like but I didn't know what
Well, what do you mean when you say not knowing what that meant to other people? Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
like I would step out socially and get my hand slapped every time I did. Anytime I
Okay.
tried to,
So
like,
you would make those moves and then people would be like, oh, you nerd, you know, like, oh, Mr. Know-it-all or something like that. Meaning that you would do
I think it
things.
wasn't even that much. They were just probably, I don't even know. I'm still oblivious, but I would guess it would be a roll of the eyes and like, ugh, that guy again or something, you know?
Right.
But you know, yeah.
And so you grew up in Iowa, and Micah, you grew up in New York.
Well, I muted. Yes, I grew up in New York,
Yeah.
in New York City, but not Manhattan. I grew up in Queens.
Okay. Yeah, I grew up, my school had about well, my graduating class was like 97 people. So I grew up in a small town in a small school. And so you went to I'm guessing a large school in New York?
Mine was huge. My graduating class in high school was 800 and something people. It was massive.
Mine was half that, 400-ish.
Yeah, and yeah, so you went to high school in Iowa, I assume, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think yeah, I want to maybe wrap it up by we can talk about maybe a few things that we've learned along the way that were key to sort of opening doors for us socially. I'll say, you know, some of the things that some of the things that I did along the way. So cognitive behavioral therapy, which is basically internalizing sort of the work of Socrates in a sense. It's all based on Socrates, you know. So, you know, he would ask, you know, fundamental questions about reality that would force people to break their unconscious, illogical, irrational thinking. So, you know, like if we have a lot of social fears, they're often irrational and they're based on our brains sort of conflating things and different logical fallacies and things like that. So, you know, one of the questions that, you know, like I mentioned, I was in a cognitive behavioral therapy program for a bit, and, you know, some of the questions that, you know, would break up some of the habitual negative thinking that would prevent me from, you know, having positive social interactions is like, you know, the idea of being a minds reader. You know, we think, oh, this person is definitely thinking this, or you know, this always happens this way, and then you know, it forces you to examine it. Does it always happen that way? Are you a minds reader? You know, and you know, with a little bit of coaching or whatever. I mean, really, you can learn how to do this independently. You know, I think
Can we
you
dive
can.
in a little bit further? Because
Yeah.
I teach a little bit of that, but I call it learned fear.
Mm.
And I think it's valid. If you learn to be afraid of something because you tried it, however small your sample size might be, right? And you try it, and then you're fearful of doing it again, that's your brain saying like, dude, we've done this before. Remember what happened last time?
It was bad.
So, but what's worth understanding is, you know, also there are other variables besides, like, you know, I think people focus on the main variable being whether or not they're worth it to other people or not. When in fact there are several other factors going on. Like if we're specifically talking about opening conversations socially, you could have walked up at a bad point in the conversation. You could have had
Yeah,
a booger
exactly.
hanging out of your nose, like, whatever, right? So
Yeah.
I think people are quick to judge that they're not
Yes.
good enough when in fact there are
We,
several factors. So if you factor in, if you look at your learned fear and you go, well, where did that really come from? And you talk to somebody who might have a little more experience than you might find out that there are a lot of other factors that might have affected that weren't you, right? Because
yes, we're like
are
meaning
you good
making
enough?
machines. I remember, so I went on a date with a woman when I was maybe, I don't know, 19 or 20 or something. And everything was great. I was like, oh, this is super dope. I was like, I think like this could be cool. And she totally ghosted me on the second date. And it was just like there's such a disconnect. I was like, how could that have gone so well? And then she just ghosted me. And I didn't know why for a long time. And of course, we're meaning making machines, so we will make up some sort of a meaning, like with any of those interactions you mentioned. Our brain just sort of does that. But they're often, probably most of the time, not right. And recognizing that is super valuable. I found out years later that shortly after our first date, she found out that she was pregnant by someone, someone else who, was just, that was like, and it was a whole consequential situation, and whatever, but it had nothing to do with how well that date went or anything I could have controlled, but it just bothered me. I was like, because it messes with your sense of reality when you're like, I was really confident that went really well. And especially when you're not just, killing it all the time and something goes that well like that, and then you get that result, it's hard to know how to interpret it. So that's why, once, especially when I found out what had happened, it was just a really big lesson for me. What you don't know what you don't know. And we try and add that part that we don't know in a way that because our brains want to make sense of the world. But, I think it's healthy to hold a lot of space to recognize with real, critical thinking. And, cognitive behavioral therapy is one way to sort of install these safeguards against creating meanings where they don't belong, which I found to be super useful and super important.
Can I jump
Another,
in a second?
yeah.
So it sounds to me like you're talking about the hierarchy of competence.
Mm.
Are you familiar with the hierarchy?
Sound like the Johari's window, like the unconscious competence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have the wrong intuition or the wrong analysis, conscious plus incompetence, right analysis, right intuition, all that stuff,
Yeah. Yeah.
That could provide a lot of insight to why you might have been doing that.
And another reason why you have to go out and do stuff. And it's, also super helpful to have a coach, a mentor, someone who's helping you to do this, is because the thing that will inevitably screw you is the things that you don't know that you don't know. Or I shouldn't say necessarily screw you, but it can keep you trapped, because depending on, how you think about it or what the situation is, you have to go through, you have to find out what you don't know that you don't know.
Well, you have to be open to the possibilities. I don't know that you always have to find out the answer in that moment, right? You have to be open to the possibility that the way that you're thinking of the situation actually might not be what actually happened, because there's a missing piece in the information and you're filling in the blank from your own perspective. And that's the whole point of positive thinking in the first place. It's like when I became aware, a lot more aware of that kind of stuff, actually, again, was with his predecessor, Brad P's Secret of Inner Game. And there's some sections in there where they do actual framing exercises. It's like a woman says this to you. What do you think the reason is? And what do you think her feelings are about you? And the feelings are not self-explanatory that you should be feeling from that, right? Like one person will feel like, oh, that was actually a really positive thing that she said that, even though it sounded like a bit of a blowout, because in her statement, she said this, this, and this, whereas the other one will only focus on the attachment to the outcome, which was, oh, it was a blowout, I failed. And it's just like, you can glean completely different meanings from the exact same sentence, depending on your mindset going into that sentence in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was sort of, the not, what you said about the stages of competence is what made me think of the starting in unconscious incompetence, and that's when you don't know what you don't know, and yeah, getting to the stage of unconscious competence when you can do things well, you have to just go through those stages to get to that point where you can just go. So a couple things that I want to offer that were big insights for me, and then I'll wrap it up, and we could talk a little bit about what you do, Jake, or and you could throw in any other tips sort of that come to mind. For me, one thing that was transformative was getting people's names. I would never do that, in a lot of situations. And once I started to do it, so I was in a store in Hollywood, and I made my purchase, and I'm leaving the store, and on the way out, the guy behind the counter says, "Thank you, Scott. Have a nice day." It was a pattern interrupt for me. Like, no one had ever done that before, and I was taken aback, and I was like, "Thank you." I was like, "I hope you have a nice day too." I was like, "What's your name?" And I didn't understand him the first time he said it, and then he looked at me. He said, "Money." I guess as his nickname is Money, and I was like, "Oh, that was dope." And I was like, that made me feel cool. Like, I liked that. I was like, I want to replicate that. So I realized that I was interacting with certain people in my neighborhood regularly because they might work in stores that I frequented or whatever. And I didn't know any of their names. So the next place I went to was a corner store in Hollywood that I used to go to all the time. So I asked the guys behind the counter, I'm like, "I've seen you guys a bunch of times. My name is Scott. What are your names?" And their names were, in this order, Deep and Joy. And I was like, if that's not a sign from the universe, I don't know what is. So I started, and this played very much into, the first assignment I had in my cognitive behavioral therapy program. Start a conversation with a barista, and of course I got to the point quickly where I could say what's up, and it started to become easier, and so on and so forth. And that sort of led into this. And what I started doing was asking everybody's name, and I had a cheat sheet, and it would say, whatever I could remember the person by, like, friendly, whether it was, friendly homeless guy in Hollywood with 3 fingers, or, the guy who works the door at Bourbon Room with the curly mustache. Whatever it was, so then when I would, before I was going to, if I was expecting to see them in particular, I'd go on the cheat sheet and I'd be like, Matt, that's his name. Okay, cool. And then I would say, "What's up, Matt," or whatever. And interesting things started to happen when I would make that just something I would just do all the time everywhere I went. I had unexpected benefits. I started getting a lot of things for free. It's like a great sort of life hack, but it really works when you do it in a place that you frequent and stuff. It creates a sort of social dynamic that I had never experienced before, where if this was like the the ultimate sort of execution of like the first assignment with in the cognitive behavioral therapy course, um, starting conversations with people in places, public places you frequent, and getting their names. And it would create this sort of connection where I realized to what degree I was sleepwalking through so much. That in and of itself was a big revelation. But what would happen when you become comfortable getting people's names, and with a few reps, you get the right sort of, you understand how to do it with the right energy and, whatever. You walk into a place and everybody knows your name. And that creates an entirely different social situation where you have a lot more status. And it just feels way better. So like I could replicate that here in Hollywood, or just, like I spent a few months like in Atlanta. So I'd do that at the coffee shop that I'd hit on the way to the gym. Hey, let's say, whatever. It is a completely different experience. And for me, I just thought that was the coolest thing. I was like, this, and that's led to so many really awesome, sort of situations for me. Like, Micah, Black Rabbit Rose. Like that's how like I would just do that at Black Rabbit Rose. And all of a sudden I walk in, everybody knows me. So they think that I have some sort of status, and fool them.
It's an interesting one for me because it's not my natural inclination. I just kind of want to be.
Sure wasn't mine.
Yeah, it's definitely not. And like, it's not like I'm antisocial in those situations. I will always ask somebody's name if I actually have an interaction, but just to find out everybody's name so that way the next time I see them, I can say, hi, Bob, or whatever. Don't care enough. Like there's just too much information for me to take on because I'm so focused on going deeper with the ones that I do care about.
Yeah.
So I have struggled with that. And I will say when I have done it, and I also keep cheat notes, every single event that I go to, every single person that I do meet and get introduced to or introduce myself to, I make notes from every event that I go to. I make notes of all the names and sometimes a little description. And it's the same kind of methodology that you're talking about, because later, if I see them at another event and I recognize the face, I can usually remember what event I met them at, but I can't remember their name. And I prefer to remember name, especially when they remember mine. And that's another thing that happened a lot, especially at being a performer, is that a lot of people remember my name because I'm a performer and I stood out to them. But many times I felt embarrassed by the fact that I didn't remember their name, even though I might have seen them by this point at 3 or 4 different events. And so for me, it just became a thing that, and it wasn't always just touring. We're talking about even just locally. So it's like, yeah, touring, it would be almost impossible because you're going to meet somewhere between 300 and 700 people on any tour. And that's just way too much to keep track of in many situations.
Right.
But home, if you meet me, for me, the average is like 10 to 20 people a night that I'm going to meet. And I should be able to at least remember some of them, certainly some of the ones that I've had some conversations with. And so it just became a thing where I wanted to write it down. But I still, in some of those situations, I'm not going to go out of my way to remember every single bartender, every single security guard, whatever. Like, it just depends on the level and depth of my interaction with them and how much capacity I have in terms of my headspace that night for that kind of level of keeping track of all of that. And you're right.
It could be just a matter of writing a super quick note in the phone, and then I noticed that it can create opportunities that were not, that I never would have seen coming. I did not anticipate that getting people's names was going to create all of this massive social proof in these different, but never conceived of that. I didn't. Yeah. I also didn't conceive of getting a bunch of free stuff.
Right, and I agree.
It was an emergent property of doing it.
Right. I agree with you is what I'm getting at, is like when I take the time to do it, when I have the brain capacity to do it, I feel that there are enough benefits that I should do it more often. And sometimes I'm good at it and sometimes I'm not.
Sometimes I forget.
Yeah. Well, listen, you're never going to remember everybody's names, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But I've made it a policy for myself, and I try to tell my guys this as well. I'm like, You should be, the person you are with your family and friends when everybody's around and you're kind of unhindered in your, I guess, social endeavors with your family or with whoever it is. That person, you should be that person with kind of everyone you meet everywhere. So fast forward, I tried to start chatting up, the grocery store checker outer person, and thought, okay, how can I relate with this person? And how can I relate with that person? How can I be the same place? And it started to be, for me at least, I started to just feel like, we're all in this together, we're just monkeys floating around on a planet all together. And we can look at each other and go, do you know what this is? Yeah, I got this, I good, right? But we're all kind of in the same boat as far as it goes. And, I learned that when I started treating everybody just the way I treated everybody else and being social with everyone, it's like everywhere you go, everybody's your friend. I have no problem at all talking with anybody anywhere to get anything that I want to get. Hey, where's this at? Hey, do you know where this is? You look like you're from around here. Where's the good best restaurant? And I just ask who's ever around. You'd be amazed how easy your life gets when you, at least that's what I do. I just kind of rely on other people for that stuff. It's great. It's wonderful. So I think it goes broader than just getting some free stuff, which, it's quite easy to get free stuff everywhere you go when you know people, obviously, but it's also like, if people see that you're comfortable and if you treat them, they feel that you're comfortable, they're going to be like, yeah, here, let me give you whatever I can.
Let's dive in for just a tiny second. Sorry to interrupt. It's easy to get free stuff when you know people. My brain goes to, you don't know somebody just because you know their name, right? But I understand that gives the feeling of knowing enough that you will get treated better. It doesn't always mean you free stuff.
Well, the goal isn't the free stuff. If you're doing it that way, you're
doing it backwards.
Unless it's the door guy. Come on, your goal is the door guy. Yeah, I want to get in, dude.
It's just
want to be the door guy's
it was really
hang out outside all night.
What it was, what it was the desire to replicate the feeling that I got when someone did that to me. And I was like, that is fucking cool. Pardon my French. And I want to replicate that. And it just sort of naturally happened. And then it was, and then you're an insider, then you're not an automaton walking into, like I did in one of my videos, I had this little monologue where I'm like, we're sitting at home watching digital representations of other people, who have do not have our best interests at heart, who are manipulating our emotions. We forget that they're not real, and then we leave to go to the store. We walk past people who desperately need our help, and we go into the store to buy things that kill us from people whose names we never bother to ask. And it's like, these are the sort of things that wake up. We're like, whoa, what the fuck are we doing? And because there is a much more, there's a much better reality that's just waiting there for us, like creating that feeling of like,
your goal was to make that person feel like you felt when somebody knew your name.
Yeah, that was the spot. That was the inspiration. My
goal when I was doing that was to kind of have a better day in times that were like a low emotional state, and also to lift up other people by empathy and being on the same team,
Yeah, it feels good to, obviously, like, it's good for everyone. It's good. It's a gift that keeps on giving. It's, it's the candle that lights out the candles. It's not, nobody loses in that game.
I mean, it's very interesting just listening to this, because like, I feel like my brain goes to, I don't need anybody in these situations, so I don't really give a shit. And then it goes to like what you were saying about like your goal, Jake, is to, I just want to get in the club, right? And that's why I feel like a lot of people will start conversations with bouncers and security, and it becomes a little transparent. And my brain goes to, that's got to be so obvious to them that so many of these idiots who really can't relate are just trying so hard to relate on anything, so they get some connection, so they feel that the next time they come in and go, hey, John, and that person, John, lets them in because they had that tiny bit of relatability. And my brain goes to, would anybody do that though? And what is the honesty of that relationship? Like, that seems so fake to me. Whereas I think Scott's relatability is like wanting to do something for somebody else. I'm simply pointing out that when you're doing it for yourself, I think you run the risk of being seen for doing it for yourself, and that could actually end up working against you. And when Scott,
Yeah, some of the magic might be, well, if
Hold on. I wasn't actually saying that I did that specifically for that.
Yeah, no, I thought that.
I'm not saying
yes.
I'm actually not saying you do either. I'm saying that I feel like I've seen other people do that. I actually see you connect and how you connect with people, and it's actually, when you do it, it feels extremely genuine. I've seen other people do it in a way where
it usually is.
Right.
But, yeah. But, you know, it's funny.
Sometimes
Micah,
it's like, dang, it's this guy tonight. Shit.
when you're talking about Mike, it was funny how you said, so you talked about, you know, wanting to create connections with, you know, bouncers or whatever. And you mentioned the name of, you know, the promoter, bouncer, whatever, as John. I was about to tell you my story about another INTJ friend of mine, John, who did a brilliant INTJ thing. So he worked as a promoter in Hollywood for like 2 years, and he would gladly make these connections with people, but he would always get their contact info. He'd always get their phone number. Now, so John was an aspiring musician, and he had this scenario that happened. He did a demo with a producer named Glenn Ballard, and it was sponsored by a record label. They had the option to pick it up. They defaulted on it, and shortly after that, K-Rock got a hold of it, a local radio station in LA. They played a song, and it blew up. So all of a sudden, John has 4 record deals on the table, and then he decides to up the ante and do a show at a local club that you guys probably know, called the Dragonfly. And
Oh yeah.
so what John did was he took so it's very smart, because a lot of artists will start asking for favors right out of the gate. And so for some of them, like, you know, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, you know, they're just constantly asking fans for favors, and, you know, and people get burned out pretty quickly. John's a smart dude. So he held on to all of these phone numbers. And then when he had 4 record deals on the table and set up the show with the Dragonfly, he spent 2 days. Now, he's got a great 2-hour documentary on how he got his record deal and everything. But he spent 2 days calling everyone who he did a favor for on this list, and said, you know, I just need you to do one thing for me. Come to the Dragonfly Tuesday night. It's going to be dope. Da, 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 da. You know, and it was a great setup. It was an appealing setup for them to want to go and do it. And, you know, and he waited for the right time when it was highly leveraged. And he spent 2 days calling people, and it created a scenario where A&R reps and celebrities couldn't get into the club. It created a perfect storm. So after that, he had 7 deals on the table, and Clive Davis is, you know, taken around in limousines in Chicago, and Jimmy Iovine's taking him to see the Stones, and he signs with Interscope, and that was the start of his career.
smart man,
Yeah.
strategic. And
Yes.
I mean, the whole point of like this conversation is to relate a lot of these scenarios and these stories to figuring people out quickly and assessing how you can better relate to them to make your relationships better, or in some cases just to get something out of it, but hopefully to make your relationships better for both. And I think that a lot of the advantage of knowing the type, or at least the basics of the type, would be that if you need to know this stuff quickly, like in a social setting, you can much better put yourself in somebody else's shoes on how they're going to receive what you're going to say or how you're going to act before you actually say or act that way, say it or act that way. And I feel like that can be extremely advantageous in terms of how your interactions go in general, but also what you get out of each interaction and what you bring to each interaction, quite frankly.
Mm.
But another thing is that we're both getting a little low on time. I'm probably going to have to bolt soon. So let's get to some of the things that you felt were imperative to discuss in this talk.
Well, I just want to say, I just want to give one more tip that I learned that was super helpful for me that's easy to apply. And then I'll, hand it over to you guys for anything else that you want to add. And then I think we can wrap it up. For me, I would often struggle with what do I say to a stranger, to meet them, like I would way overthink it, and it was just a tough nut for me to crack. And then what I arrived on and what I've been doing for years that works very well, in my experience, is I say the same thing to everyone. It's like, there's people like, like Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, Evan Pagan, like they wear like the same thing every so that they don't have to, spend the time trying to think about, what to wear, which is an entirely separate thing. But it's sort of like that. Like I don't spend any time thinking about, in most cases, how I'm going to approach a situation, unless it's a sort of special situation. If I'm striking up a conversation with a stranger, like in a bar or something, I don't really frequent bars much these days, not like not like I used to, but what I would do is just say, hey, how's your night going? Like literally to everyone. Doesn't matter if they're a man, if they're a woman, if anything, nothing, none of it. Like you can say that to anyone, and I would, and if it's someone sitting next to me, I can say it without even looking at their face, and like they'll, and you get a certain, you can learn, you can get sort of all the information you need to know about the next step, of the interaction from their response to that question. Sure. So like what is the energy that they'll tell you in a sense how open they are. If you come at it with the right energy, how open they are to having a conversation. They might tell you something really interesting. They might, you can get a sense of whether or not, in some cases, it's generally pretty rare that people will just respond in a way that's like, okay, this person doesn't want to have a conversation right now. Sometimes we're all like, can be in that mode where just like, I'm going through some shit and I don't want to talk about it, whatever the case may be. But I found that just sort of, and I think, maybe my type as an INFJ, maybe a little more in tune to the like vibrational energy that I'm sort of using. It might be a little bit of a different process for an INTJ or for other types. But certainly, a tip for any INFJs out there, and I'm curious what your thoughts on it. That's worked really well for me. It's just, I have so many cool conversations just because you're just starting, you deliver it with good energy. And more often than not, people will respond with good energy, and it can just be like, just a pleasant, quick hello, or like you could end up following the white rabbit in, like in Hollywood, and next thing you know, you're at a show with them, and then you're introducing them to your friends, and then this, and whatever, and that's, I've built, some of my social circle from that. I've never, and it just eliminated any anxiety about what do I say to this person? Like, do I comment on this thing or that or whatever? I could be in my head about that stuff forever. And that just eliminated that.
I'll let Jake comment on that one first.
I have nothing to add.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I I have thought about that as well. especially because so often I don't care. And I mean, I just don't like, I can't walk around caring about everybody's fucking feelings in them every single moment, because that's not efficient, right? We've talked about the need for efficiency, and I have my own goals for the day and my own goals for how I want to interact with the people I do care about. And how much can you spread that out? Like, in a way that's going to be effective. Yeah, you can spread it out to the point where you're depleted and it's ineffective, or maybe you don't even give your friends enough of the time or energy that they maybe needed in that moment as well. But I have found there's limitations. I really wanted to do that a lot more. And I did do that a lot more in my 20s when I started spreading that out somewhat freely, meaning even sometimes as going as far as like, giving feedback to people or advice to people on things that are like intricately going on in their lives. And it's just like, you can't be everybody's therapist. Like, it's hard enough to be your own therapist and maybe even your friend's therapist or whatever, but it's like certainly not like in a social setting. People start wanting some feedback sometimes on situations they go pretty deep. And I just found sometimes it's better to limit the energy in that. But one of the things that I like to do with what you were talking about specifically is to open with something like, what's the best thing about your day so far? Something like that, where it makes them think of something positive and something, stuff that's going on well for them. And I think you can get a lot out of that kind of situation, out of that kind of conversation. And if it does go reasonably well, seem into the conversation. Another one that I like is like, what's something or a couple of things that you're really grateful for right now, like something like along those kinds of lines, where you're framing something in a way that's overly positive, but by the same token, it's making somebody really think and take stock of either their day or their life on a deeper level than maybe they had up until that moment of the interaction. So especially,
I think
are you talking about like just general social situations, Micah?
all of them. Yeah, I'm talking about whether it's a general social situation or even possibly a potential dating situation.
Because it strikes me that, all of us have infinite value to give to others in social situations, like quite simply by being festive with what the occasion is, right? If you're in the bar, why people go to the bar? Be social, have a few drinks, have a good time, raise their estate.
Sure.
Right. So if you can provide that, why not? That seems like something you could infinitely give, cheers, man. How's your night going? What's up? How are you? You're going to be there anyway, right? And if you're at a concert, it's like quite obvious what the festivity is, right? You can
absolutely.
women wear the sports jersey, even though they don't care about the game,
But I guess when you give me let's go back to your first example. You're at the bar, someone comes over and they want to cheers you. I'm having no problem with the cheers.
I'm saying that I'm already moving. I would be already moving through the bar, doing my normal thing. And I can see when it's quite obvious when someone is, a piece of furniture. You can raise somebody's state and help them have a great night. I think, I don't know, when you say that I can't give something to everybody, my first thing was, well, I feel like I have infinite to give. I feel like
that's what I was saying. Like the candle that you can light other candles with, it's sort of, another thing I'll say that is a distinction to make between a typical INFJ and INTJ approach is, so INTJs tend to be more digital. So like what you're talking about were certain questions that are leading to information in a sense, whereas all I'm looking for is the bounce back. I want and information they want to volunteer. So if they're in a social mood, if they want to have an interaction, so if you deliver it with good energy,
strategy other than like making people feel good, I guess, I don't know, having a great night,
when I do it, I have zero expectations whatsoever. I'm literally a blank slate reading what comes back to me, and then I just improvise from there. So it could be like, so sometimes the move is, it's just like, that's just the end of it. How's your night going? All right. Yeah, whatever. They're just, and that's the end of it. And then other times, great. I just, we got here from Ontario yesterday. Like we did, this thing yesterday. And then it's like, oh, dope. What else you got planned? Like, wait, you doing the rest of the night tonight or whatever? Like, And you know, I end up being like, you know, Hollywood tour guide because, you know,
Yeah, I mean,
you know,
there's
love those
certainly a
sorts of
time
things,
and a
but it could,
place. There's certainly a time and
yes,
a place for that. And I'm not
yeah.
saying I am black and white with it by any means. But what I am saying is that like that kind of like surface level conversation isn't that interesting to me for the most part, especially when I don't care about the person. Then now to Jake's point, if I see somebody who like I feel a good energy from, but I don't maybe like I want that little moment of interaction, sure, I'll cheer somebody or have a momentary smile or even a momentary laugh. But like many people in those situations, I don't care enough to ask the small talk conversation, how are you doing, or how's your day going?
I don't
Because,
either. That's the thing. That's the thing is though, the last thing about that is how their night is actually going for it's only leading in it's getting a read on their state in a
right,
sense.
and my own.
And then like what like I don't want to sit there and talk to them about I mean, you know, I'm not a you know, small talk kind of guy. It's not what I'm going for. All it is a quick foot in the door, and then it's a neutral place. So it's you're not you know, it doesn't give the vibe like you're trying to get something from them or anything. It's an easy question to answer.
Right.
Someone who's generally open socially, if you give it with good energy, is going to give you good energy back from there. And they will often volunteer something interesting if they're an interesting person to talk to. They'll usually very early on indicate that they'll give you the information that you need to know that, oh, this dude's, you know, fun or whatever the case may be, and then you make the assessment if you want to, you know, invest the time to, you know, hang out with this person. I don't waste time if there's a disconnect or if it's going to be a poor use of my time to spend time conversing with someone where it's, you know, it's just not the thing. But it's, and I think Jake, you know, my experience with you, you know, it's you're creating an atmosphere sort of like just like, you know, in general, an atmosphere of openness, and you're creating possibilities, you're raising people's states, you know, you're
I'm also entertaining myself
yeah.
to
Yeah, but
some
that's
level.
what you
Like
find entertaining.
when Micah said most people are boring, my first thought was like, oh, well, I push them. Like, I'll talk,
But how
but then
yeah,
I
how
cut through that, and I'm like, let's fucking. I just like to, excuse my French. I like to, I don't know, push things into an area of discomfort, maybe, or
Yeah, I
I
get that.
like to push. Maybe I'm an antagonist. I like to push things and see what, and I don't mean push things uncomfortably. So I mean like. I don't know. I guess I'm interested in possibilities, you know, socially, what happens when you I don't know. I guess I just that's
I
what
feel that
I
too.
lead with giving and good nature and lifting everybody's state, and then if it can be funny and we can all laugh about it, or if we can, you know, build each other up, like, you know, build our states up, that I'm into that, you know.
I agree. And I'm not saying that I don't ever want to do it. I think I'm just a little bit more judicious about who I'm willing to do that with. I'm a little more targeted.
Yeah.
And also, it depends on my mindset, because if I go into that situation, like if you and I were to catch up, if we haven't caught up in a while, it's extremely inefficient for me to focus on a bunch of people that I don't care about when the person I care about that I haven't caught up in a while with is sitting right across from me. I would much rather dig in and go way deeper with the person I'm catching up with. And
You're commonly surrounded by a million friends. I'm commonly at bars with a million strangers.
fair enough. But I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. That's one of those things where you're talking about like parsing out like the other factors into
Yeah,
things
yeah,
that,
yeah.
you know, that aren't necessarily obvious, but obviously
And for
context.
those listening, Mike is not a bad guy who like cuts himself off from people either.
not at all.
You
I'm
make
very,
yourself sound horrific.
Yeah, but
Yeah, I don't know if I should spend my time
this
with
is
that
not worth
person.
my time. I'm out.
fuck those people. I don't care about them. No, but I mean, it's like, it's simply a matter of like, even the other day, like I'm spending some time talking to some people I haven't seen in a minute, catching up, whatever. I still met some new people. I did, but there were other people who I clearly could see that they wanted to connect, and I just didn't feel the energy with them. And I was just like, nah, not gonna. I can reserve it. As I get older, I think this is another thing, is like when I was younger, I was much more prone to doing that, to spreading it out to a much wider field of people, but smaller amounts to each one of those people. Now I feel like my energy in the night is, and my focus definitely is limited a little bit. It's not like a scarcity mentality. It's an abundance mentality for the right person who's going to inspire it. But I don't have the desire to push it out to everybody anymore. And when I did connect with people this past weekend, for instance, I noticed those people that I connected with, I went pretty deep with. And then many other people that I felt they wanted a little connection, I kept it super surface and moved on quickly because I just didn't want to spend too much energy on it. It felt efficient to do it this way. And I noticed myself doing it once or twice. But by the same token, when somebody expressed a need, like there was one person who lost their coat, there was one person who lost their phone, I was always willing to help. I was always willing to engage those conversations because it was a specific need. It wasn't just a general sucking of my energy.
Mm.
Mm, mm,
Mm.
yes.
Mm. We want to put a
Okay.
on this
Jake,
Scott. I'm past a little time here, so
yeah. I was gonna just ask if if you had any closing thoughts, and what people, closing thoughts on the conversation, and
as
what
far
people
as
can
like
hire you
personality
for.
types and how I thought it was as far as like we're talking about personality types in general in this, right? That's the whole
Well,
goal.
I would say it's my role to kind of parse out the things about personality type, and for you, I think just being the person with expertise on social interactions. So, I guess, maybe any closing thoughts or comments on anything that we've said, and then also what people can hire you for. And I'll put a
What kind
link
of
to your.
listeners do you feel like you'll have? People who are interested in finding their own personality type and maybe if they can be social, or what kind of a listener are we?
Well, Myers-Briggs, I think a lot of people are interested in Myers-Briggs as a vehicle for self-understanding and self-development. So often people who are in Myers-Briggs are, some of them may be, people who have success in the corporate world, and some of them are going to be teenagers who are just sort of finding themselves. It's a very diverse audience. I think just, social skills in general, I think are something that's obviously of, wide appeal to a lot of people, which is, I thought it would be good to put on this channel and to add some commentary about, our specific types. But I think, really it runs the gamut. The people who have hired me for sessions from the YouTube channel are a very diverse bunch. So of course, I'll put a link to your YouTube channel in the description, and then also, anything else I can go to, I'll make a URL, whattype.com/Jake, and then anything else, that might make sense to help people connect. I'll put
Yeah, I mean,
there.
I'm not trying to sell anything today, obviously. If somebody was looking into their personality type and looking into social situations also, I guess being a guy who does have some expertise in being terrible and then fixing that, I would say that my only piece of advice would be, I found, at least my experience was, I found out I was capable of a lot more than I thought when I pushed myself. And I think that there's a lot of happiness that can come from that journey or that growth, if you're willing to take repeated action on something, like that, like stepping out socially. For me, if I had known the benefits, I would have taken much more massive action more immediately, I guess.
Yeah.
It really impacts your life in a serious way, and your business and your personal life and everything else.
Yeah.
That would
Yeah.
be my last tidbit, if there was one.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, I think there is one now.
I agree.
Uh,
We talked about a lot of different benefits to knowing this kind of stuff and being aware of this kind of stuff, and challenging yourself out of your little box, your little perception box. But certainly it can relate to family stuff, as it did with you, Scott, business stuff as it does with many people, and social dynamics for meeting new interesting people in your social world. But any knowledge can be good, obviously, but how applicable is it to everybody's life? And well, that depends on the person. And I think what we're talking about here is stuff that is ubiquitous. It can apply to pretty much everybody.
Yeah.
And what you do with it is up to you. It's depending on where you need it more. You know, where are you lacking this kind of knowledge or this kind of insight in a way that could benefit your life? You know, everyone's going to have a slightly different circumstance for where that is. And I think all of this stuff is super applicable to most people across the board, though.
Yeah.
But
Yep. I think so. I think, yeah, we're just sort of strategic thinkers, and it's a unique journey for people of our types, but I think what we arrive at is a lot of stuff that's universally applicable. So yeah, hopefully some of those things are useful to some of the people out there on YouTube. So
Word.
cool. Well, thank you guys very much. That was cool. That was cool. I had some good takeaways from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
Thanks for having me as well. Thanks for asking me on that hike that instigated this conversation.
Yeah. Beautiful. Love it. Yeah. You never know. Just go out and get some exercise, and yeah, you never know where it will lead, rather than
Another good reason to
Yeah, I
say
know.
yes more often than you say no.